Good afternoon, everybody. How are we today?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I'm glad
Oh,
it's the weekend.
that is a different answer than you typically give. So,
Yes.
okay.
Will is on with us this time. So, yeah, we'll have Will chime in too.
Yes, I'm finally back from my extended house hunting vacation, I'll call it. So I'm glad to be finally back.
And we're glad to have you back.
Yep.
So, last week we kind of started diving into some of the racial and sexual disparities, and it was primarily in the military. We started talking a little bit about that. Kenny and I did. Um, and we're inviting people to come on and speak if they want to come on and speak and do so anonymously. But yeah, we're allowing a platform if people want to do that. You know, blank your screen out, change the name if that's what you want to do.
Mhm.
Because this is Black History Month, we just want to make sure that we are covering some of this. And there are a lot of articles that are out now about racial trauma and so forth. And so we're just going to do something very brief today. Kenny, what do you have today?
Well, I wanted to just start with the Erin broadcast that we had talked about last week, which was part two this go around. Did you get a chance to watch it? Still Living in My Skin, episode 2?
I did. I
Okay.
did.
So I also had a chance to watch it, and it was just as moving as the first one. There was a point during that conversation where a gentleman just reiterated that when you're a person of color, you're often told that you have to be the best or like be the greatest at something for anybody to take you seriously, and how that can put a lot of pressure on a child or a person. I remember being told that frequently when I was growing up, and the internalized trauma that comes along with that, of having to be the best so that anybody even values what you have to say. So that really stood out to me in that conversation.
Hi, how are you? We have a guest here with us today. How are you, Mike?
Yeah. Hi, yeah, it's doing well.
Well, go ahead and continue, Kenny.
Oh, okay. That kind of led me to thinking about trauma, and trauma that sometimes the population that you live with unwittingly places upon you, right?
Mhm.
And it, culturally, we all experience this trauma that takes us into adulthood, and then we continue to be re-victimized by people who look like us and then other people, right? Because it's something that we're just continuously taught. And so that led me to reading about PTSD in people of color, and how a lot of times we don't even know that that's what we're experiencing when it comes to mental health. We don't know that initial fear or that physical reaction when placed in certain situations is trauma, and how it affects our bodies and our psyches. That was real poignant for me in watching the second part of the documentary.
I noticed that it wasn't as heavy as the first episode or
Mhm.
as part. There were more positives in the second part of it. Um, and so I was glad to see that. You know, I didn't want for all of it to be, or for people to assume that Black men are trying to be victims or that all Black men have negative experiences. And so I thought that the whole program was very well put together. and they included a lot of different experiences, a wide age range. There were men of color who were not all Black. They had other ethnicities, mixed race. And so I was glad to see that. And they had one gentleman who was a 4-star general.
Yeah.
And so, he talked about, his experiences. He didn't really have very many negative experiences. And so it was good to see that as well.
I think that was important to see. And the fact that they ended with the quote about hope, it was nice to see. And yet I wondered, was this second part to make it more palatable for other people? Like, are we really experiencing change and hope, or was this let's tie this together so that people don't walk away feeling like shame or guilt?
Yeah, I wonder that too. But I thought it was balanced. I thought it was very well done, very, very balanced. And you're bringing up a good point, Kenny, about how it can impact other people. Like if you put too much out there, how will that impact the general public? Will they be experiencing guilt and shame, or will they, say, what, all that stuff did happen. I'm not a part of that. I'm not racist. There's nothing I can do about that. Sometimes it might be too heavy. Because of that, then a lot of people of color or minorities, they may not want to talk about things. They'll feel uncomfortable. And then it's the elephant in the room again. So I think we do have to have balance with it in order to move forward. We have to, we can't be on the extremes. I always bring up the bell curve, whenever I'm talking about something. We need to make sure that we're in the bell curve when we're talking about any topic, so that it can be received by who it needs to be received by.
Absolutely.
Mike, what would you like to add from your perspective on racial issues, military? Do you have anything from your perspective?
Chiming in the middle of the conversation here, but just to give a little background, I'm born as I guess, first generation Asian American here, here in the States, and being I guess, the oldest child of two siblings, and raised by parents of immigration, I had to understand this like strange world or society that I'm like growing up in as a child, without the language, without the knowledge that my peers in school or growing up with had, that I didn't quite have. And it kind of places you in like this strange like no man's land of like, well, I see other people's families, teach them how like society works, whereas for my own, like, I had to figure out, well, what's the dynamic that I'm working with when it comes to having a family who just doesn't understand like Western societal values and culture, and like every other race when they're only like from an Asian background. It's applicable, I guess, in the military world as well. Is like, well, what is this raw like gung-ho-ness that everybody has when it comes to defending the country, when I can't quite identify the same level of nationalism that everybody else is brought into. So you feel like this, as I spoke with my wife, it's like a fly in a wall, just observing everything. You would love to raise topics on like racial inequalities in the military as well as like elsewhere, but there's like this sort of like this catch-22 where there's a status quo where, well, like people say like racism is dead, but what actually has happened with racism is it's gone covert.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it's catch-22. You can't like call it out, like it's hard to when you're trying to find other people who've experienced like similar experiences, or like some form of, I want to say victimization, but rather being affected by this ominous like fog of war, so to speak. It's like the us versus them mentality. What is this feeling that you have that you lived with your entire life, which I would call it like systemic racism. I kind of don't know where I'm like heading off here. It's hard to put my finger on it.
But it's good that you're saying this. It's good that that people get to hear this because other people are feeling this just like you are. And so the
Mhm.
fact that they get to see that, there are no words to put to assign to it,
Right,
the confusion, the cognitive dissonance, and, like
right,
this shouldn't be happening in the military.
right,
So this is real, you
right,
know, you're taking the cover off of the elephant in the room.
right.
So I appreciate your being here.
Thank you. Yeah. One thing I also like to bring up is having an Asian like ethnicity. You kind of in America, you kind of put into this like model minority type of like position, and it's something I hear and read about all the time. Is there are some like perks as well as disadvantages to it. Well, the perks is like, well, you can kind of like slide by as if you're just a chameleon, without like a lot of this, like a scapegoat of some sort, of just sneaking by. But at the same time, you can recognize like disparity between all the races when it comes
Mhm.
to um, like a like white majority country. Hopefully,
And
it makes some kind of sense there.
you do make sense. And I wouldn't have thought of it like that, that you get to, you're in a minority
Yeah,
and you see the racism and you even experience it sometimes, but you kind of get to be the fly on the wall sometimes.
yeah,
And now that you're saying that, yeah,
yeah.
because I wouldn't have thought of it from that angle.
And just one little tidbit too is like I recently got married to my wife Lindsay, and she is of a Caucasian background, but she's not used to, I guess, the level of racial disparity or like so-called privileges that she would receive. So now that when we're interacting with each other in public, we can see like the eyes of the public space are just kind of like turned towards us now because there's something odd about this couple here, and um, a lot of people don't identify with these like feelings because they're not used to it.
Mhm.
It's kind of eye-opening really, and I've learned some things. I'm constantly keeping my eyes on like taking in new information and like constantly trying to rationalize and digest it and make sense of it. And it's kind of upsetting when you want to talk about it but not too many people are interested in hearing about disparages of like the minority populations.
Well, we're interested.
Thank you.
Definitely so. And the opportunity to get to hear your point of view, um, I'm really appreciative. Because a few months ago I was looking through my reading history or my audio history because the only time I ever get to read a book is when I'm listening to it.
Mhm.
And a few months back in December, I had the opportunity to listen to Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong. And um, it was incredibly moving because, as you said, Mike,
Mhm.
as a child of immigrant parents of Asian background,
Mhm.
having to find your way in the culture that you're raised in, and yet here you are placed in Western culture. When she was talking about it, I found myself a lot of times during the book having to pause and cry,
Mhm.
because where do you fit in, right?
Right.
And then to hear you talk about it, not just in your everyday life with you and your wife, but like the place you work, your career, the people that you've pledged yourself to for the next
Right.
however many years, still don't acknowledge the difficulties or nuances of you as a person. Like that's a big deal.
Right.
So
No, you hit on a nail there, Kenny. It's I read a lot of like experiences of I guess minorities in let's just call it military or like police forces where when you're in the uniform you're respected just like all your other peers. But at the end of the day, when you clock out and you take the uniform off, you kind of lose like that sense of, I guess, like protection of the uniform, and you're just considered as other, no longer as like a servant of the general public. I felt that way, I guess, when I was stationed down in Georgia. It's kind of like rural area, and in uniform, like I'm respected, like it's all good. But once I take it off, like I feel like I have no sense of like a protection or like a something I can hide behind, so to speak.
That's a shame that you have to say that. Protection, that the uniform is protection for you. Wow. I would not have even thought of it from that angle either. That, you go to work, you're there to protect our country, to represent our country, and your uniform is your protection
Yeah,
against people in this country.
yeah.
That's absurd.
It's
That
a
is
it's a
absurd.
strange conundrum to be in.
Yes, yes, it is. And so this is what people need to hear.
Yeah.
This is real. And I'm reading some of these articles on, from the American Psychological Association about, racial trauma and all of that, and how because these conversations are so heavy and they're difficult, people don't want to talk about them in public because they make white people uncomfortable. And so then we just avoid talking about it, so
Mhm.
then like in workplaces, they may not have the cultural diversity workshops or all of that. They may take that off the table because it's like, okay, we're not going to do that because this is going to cause these kind of problems, or people are going to be uncomfortable, or we don't want to do that. And then that causes people to not, people of color or other minorities, then they just don't talk at all,
Right.
for fear of making Caucasian people uncomfortable. And I
Right.
think that's a shame. Then there's the microaggressions and so forth that occur.
Right.
Yeah.
There seems to be like a status quo in society that we don't want to rock the boat,
Right.
and I think by rocking the boat, it causes like this huge upheaval that nobody wants to talk about, or it's everything's just stigmatized. Like same thing with mental health, it's stigmatized,
Mhm.
but we all can like recognize that it's a problem. Just who's really thrown the funding or the money or the power or whatever it is to actually bring it to light and normalize it, so to speak.
Yeah, and I was gonna piggyback off of what Erin said because it's so true. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned Georgia because that's where I was raised. That's where I'm
Yeah.
from. And I remember when I was working, I've worked for a couple different universities, and when I was working for one in Georgia, they make you do all these compliance trainings every year, but not a single one was on diversity or being aware of like your privilege and stuff like that. It was always over other important things, other safety issues and stuff like that, but they never did any sort of diversity training. And
Yeah.
now that you bring that up, I'm like, oh my goodness, they didn't. And you're right but it's also a mostly white area. So a lot of people,
Right.
they don't think about it. And it's the same thing that when I moved here, I'm working at a local college here too. And we recently have been having some diversity talks and stuff like that. And they did a live poll during one of our Zoom meetings. And they're like, how much do you think, diversity is important or we should do diversity trainings? And how much of you think that systemic racism is affecting people? And I was absolutely shocked at the number of people who said it wasn't an issue and we didn't need it. And I was just shocked, especially because that college is a very diverse population. But the number of people who were watching who live reacted, I want to say like 60%, only 60% of people said we needed it, which meant 40%, almost half of the people in that, 300 people that were watching were saying,
Yeah.
oh, it's not important. We don't need it. And I was shocked. I was just absolutely shocked by that.
Do you think they were believing that it's not needed because they don't have an issue or because it's uncomfortable
I have no
to talk
clue.
about it? What do you
Yeah.
think?
I don't know, honestly, because they also asked the question, like, how many of you personally have been affected by racism in the workplace? And I want to say like 10% of people said they had been. So I'm thinking it was probably the majority of people who hadn't been were thinking, oh, it's not a problem for me, so it's not necessary. But it was just sad. The whole thing made me very, very sad that people were still thinking that way.
I couldn't contain my reaction to your sentence, Will, because unfortunately, that is not uncommon that people, whether they're persons of color, and I'm not just talking about Black people, I'm talking about Asian Americans, Latinx, like I'm talking about anybody who's not considered Caucasian, so Indigenous people. The idea that a Caucasian person has not been affected by racism is in some ways absurd to me, because if they treat people poorly or without thought, they are being affected by racism.
That's true.
If a person, doesn't believe that they're doing anything wrong by using a racial slur, even in the privacy of their own home, they're being affected by racism because their children are hearing that. And so it boggles my mind to hear that an academic institution is not doing more to enlighten themselves. And it kind of just goes back to that fact that, are we just putting lipstick on a pig, or are we doing something?
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of what I was always taught growing up. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Exactly. So there is no neutral ground on this. Sitting by and being neutral, like a lot of people think they are, you're being part of the problem because you're allowing those ideas to spread unless you're actively doing something against it to fix it.
And I'm not a Black man, and so I don't know what that feels like to be a Black man. And so hearing experiences is helpful to me. I don't know what it's like to be an Asian man, or an Asian person. And so I welcome hearing those experiences. I want to hear experiences from all people, because to me it's educational. It helps me to have some level of empathy for people. I don't just do the cultural diversity just because it's required of me. I want to learn about people. I want to learn about people, no matter what their sexual orientation or gender or all of that, because it's exciting to me, to learn about people who are different from me.
Yeah, I think learning what makes a person tick, there's so much information out there. It's a fascinating world because I think without understanding how neurally diverse, humanity is, how will we ever solve the root of our problem if we're constantly just letting, things slide, and we'll just put a Band-Aid on it later on instead of being proactive about it. I find the field of like neuroscience and psychology very fascinating because I think over the course of the last couple 100 years, we're just scratching the surface here. It just needs more data.
I agree.
Absolutely. Erin, I didn't get a chance. You asked me and you asked Mike, what are some of our thoughts over this last week? What have you been kind of mulling over or thinking about or reading about?
Well, when I have time to read, well, I haven't really had, I haven't had a lot of time to read. In my work, I get to hear a lot of different experiences, from people, all different backgrounds. And, because I do work a lot with the military, of course, I mentioned last time that they're feeling silenced, in a lot of areas. And this is one of those areas, when there are racial disparities and sexual disparities. They're feeling like they can't say anything, like what Mike was saying. It's kind of like a cognitive dissonance thing. Like it's in the military, it's supposed to be very welcoming and a sense of community. but you don't talk about things
Right.
that are heavy. And then so I hear about it, in the sessions. That's when people really get to, spill all of that. And you just wouldn't know that these are the types of things that are being, that people are walking around, they're in their uniforms and, serving their country, and they're carrying all of this heavy stuff. So that's, I don't get to read anything, I hear it.
Yeah.
And I'm honored that they are telling me this stuff, that they trust me enough to say, you know what, I'm hurting, I need to have a voice.
Yeah, what is freedom of speech when it's suppressed?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even by those that are defending our country, there's some weird. It's irony.
And it's not anything political either. It's feeling hurt and silenced. There's nothing political about it.
Yeah.
Nothing anybody's saying to me is political. You just want to feel like a person.
Right.
You don't want to feel invisible. But I mean, I'm glad that I can, and they're glad that I'm able to, speak like this, on this platform, because some of them, they still feel like, even though I'm telling them you can be anonymous if you like, you can have a voice, they're still feeling like, you know what, well, I don't want to get in trouble, but, I'm here, and you all can be here, or whoever can be here and be their voice, because it shouldn't be like this.
Right. Well, thank you for providing this platform too. It's refreshing, I'd say.
Good.
A lot of things that we carry on our shoulders, with intent or without, and over the years, I guess some people don't realize until they kind of hit rock bottom that they've been shouldering a lot of burdens that was completely like outside of their perspective, and it's like a sense of liberation or freedom, I would say.
Well, good. That's really
Experiencing.
good.
Absolutely.
Then you realize that you're not alone.
Mhm.
And it gets out there, and then people, they're less afraid, to come forward. And it's not that we're trying to punish anybody or disparage the military or anything like that. I mean, that just happens to be, people that I work with, people who have been in the military, they're veterans, or family members who have, had contact with the military. It's just a population that I'm familiar with working. I've worked with them, and they don't usually have anybody to, say these things to.
Yeah, when you take people from like all walks of life, all over the country, all over the world, and just kind of put them in like one melting pot that we call, the military system or whatever it is, you're gonna butt heads, and it's time and time again throughout history. It's always going to be an issue. So how do you address it? And I think by being open and frank about it, it sheds a lot of light on what was once in the shadows, which is like the voice of from like different backgrounds, I guess.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I think this was productive, and moving forward, but yeah, we're going to do this every Saturday for a couple Saturdays,
Okay.
so we can give others a chance to, feel more comfortable, coming forth. And, I get emails and, texts, suggesting that we bring certain things up. So if you all hear of anything, or if you know of somebody else that wants to use the platform, have them shoot me an email, or they can just pop into the recording, and yeah, we welcome them.
Absolutely. Again, Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Oh no, thank you. I'm honored, and it's been, I guess, welcoming and warm to be amongst you all.
Thank you all, and you guys please be safe this weekend.
Thank you, Erin. You as well.
All right, take care.
This podcast is produced by Erin Alexander, hosted by Kennie Pullitt and Erin Alexander, and mixed and edited by William Lynch.